The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, thank you for joining us for this final 2018 Prop 39 training session, Perspectives on the Cost of ZNE Retrofits. I am Connie Umfris, Communications Manager at New Buildings Institute. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping things to tell you about. First, you are muted and we cannot hear you. This helps keep the background noise down so that everyone can better hear our speakers. I want to direct you to the dashboard that you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties and cannot see the slides or hear our speakers, you can use the question pane in this dashboard to let us know, and we will help you as we go. Please ask questions in the same question pane as they come up. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. At the end of this webinar session, you will be given the opportunity to take a short survey where you can also provide your AIA number for credit. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with the links to the recording and the slides for this session. I'd like to turn it over to Riley Loveland, the NBI project manager for this series of trainings. Riley?
Thanks, Connie. So as Connie said, my name is Riley Loveland and I'm a project manager here at the New Buildings Institute. And if you've been following along in this webinar series, you've probably heard from me a few times. So welcome back and thanks for joining us. So I'd like to welcome you to the fourth and final webinar in our 2018 Prop 39 ZeroNet Energy School webinar series. This is the perspectives on the costs of ZNE retrofits. And so I'm going to do a little preface before we start this webinar. I want to acknowledge the challenges associated with cost data. So often this is a notoriously difficult topic for a number of reasons. And for one, we know that construction costs vary for both code level and net zero buildings, and that cost varies widely based on building type, location, commodity costs, and the labor market. So this wide range of factors can pose a challenge for the meaningful comparison of ZNE buildings to each other and to code level buildings. So what we do know is that design teams report that ZNE projects have been delivered for no incremental costs. So on the limited set of data of these early adopter ZNE buildings across the US, this research suggests that the costs of ZNE can range from 0 to 10% over a similar building. So at NBI, our research suggests that these experienced design teams set early energy targets, utilize materials and systems that serve multiple benefits, and reduce cost premiums to achieve ZNE results within an established budget. In a later slide, I'll outline some of those strategies that we've seen utilized by these design teams. So while system level cost information may exist, it's not typically reported and is a challenge to compile, especially after the project is complete. Incremental costs for systems that perform better than a code baseline are even more difficult to collect, since the systems that would simply meet code baseline are often not designed. So when there's no design, it means costs often are not even calculated. We're still early in the adoption curve for ZNE schools, so sometimes costs might look more expensive up front, but as these practices become part of everyday decision making, we'll start to see this trend of ZNE becoming much more cost effective. So since this pilot program is young and a lot of data is new, we'll be collecting costs over the next couple of years to disseminate and showcase the feasibility of these cost-effective ZNE retrofits. So today, this webinar is the first foray into discussing the costs so far associated with retrofits to ZNE in the Prop 39 program. Our speakers today will be discussing where they are in the process of ZNE and the decisions they've made in their projects to make them cost-effective. So on that note, I'd like to thank the California investor-owned utilities who are sponsoring this webinar series. And to give a little background on New Buildings Institute, we've researched and defined leading edge practices and technology applications for high performance buildings and then translate them into innovative and practical solutions for the utility, energy efficiency, and commercial building industries. And for those of you seeking continuing education credit, here are the learning objectives for today. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to ZNE and ZNE in schools specifically for some background, and then pass the mic off to today's presenters. So a ZNE building is a building that produces at least as much energy as it uses in a year when the grid supplied energy, including primary energy for generation, transmission, and delivery to the site, is taken into account. Honestly, there are many definitions of ZNE, but the key takeaway is that all definitions are grounded in efficiency first and the remaining loads serviced by renewables. So there are many benefits of these high-performance ZNE schools, and we're really here to highlight the stories of what we've learned through our research and the implementation of this Prop 39 program. ZNE is the next step in sustainable high-performance buildings, and with codes and standards continuing to ramp up, ZNE is a way to innovate now to save money in the long run. ZNE schools present an ideal building type with generally predetermined occupancy patterns, and then building occupancy can generally be planned or organized. They can have sufficient land, and they are owner-occupied. There are also these really highly visible examples to the community and serve to set a precedence because going ZNE is fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars as they put more money back into the schools because of lower building operation costs. And ZNE schools have demonstrated increased student performance with better occupant health, attendance, and improved teacher satisfaction and retention. And ZNE buildings really provide these hands-on project-based learning opportunities for gaining the 21st century skills and knowledge students need in today's world. They can also be more resilient to severe weather events and create safe havens for the community. These are just some of the examples of the research about the benefits of high-performance schools. And with students spending approximately 1,000 hours a year in a school, transforming these classrooms into healthy and productive spaces is really important, especially when the short-term and long-term health benefits of students and staff is really at risk. So if you'd like to dive deeper into these benefits, our previous webinar, Dreaming the Future, discusses these studies in more detail, and that's available at newbuildings.org. So at NBI, we maintain the largest database of ZNE buildings and work to identify, research, and analyze these buildings that are the leaders in ultra-low and ZNE performance. And as you can see, the market uptake of ZNE buildings has grown tremendously, 700% since 2012. And for some reference on the colors on this chart, the green ZNE verified buildings have 12 months of metered data that shows zero net or net positive energy production over those 12 consecutive months. And then ZNE emerging buildings in the blue are the buildings that have a publicly stated goal of ZNE, but may not have yet demonstrated that they've achieved that goal. It may still be in planning or design phase, under construction, in operation less than 12 months, or has not yet documented that ZNE performance over 12 consecutive months. So each year we publish our Getting to Zero list of all of these projects, and we're always looking for more projects. So if you'd like to be counted, please let us know and send us an email. So within this list of ZNE schools, of ZNE buildings, schools, and really in particular the K-12 schools across the nation are leading this market transformation to ZNE because they thrive as these centers for change and leadership in ZNE and ZNE education. They are these high-performing learning environments that really value student progress as a driver. That's kind of an important piece to take to heart. And as very visible entities, they can also garner community support and use this community pushback to drive the ZNE goal. And it's important to note that these ZNE buildings don't have to just be entire schools, but can also be libraries, science classrooms, or additions. And using the need for, let's say, system upgrades or other naturally occurring building timelines is a great time to evaluate ZNE as a path for your next construction or upgrade project. So we want to emphasize this idea of the path to ZNE, that while ZNE is this very realistic endgame, as our presenters will show today, the path to sustainable and zero net energy schools is a process that takes time to accomplish. And school districts can really start now with benchmarking, setting energy targets, identifying policies, and implementing plans and practices to really move the schools and the rest of your district down the path to zero. So in our research, we've identified some common themes from these buildings that have successfully implemented ZNE, and this research shows that these are the key steps to implementing this a successful ZNE process, which is getting stakeholder support for your ZNE goals, making a commitment to ZNE, using this integrated design process, setting absolute energy targets, designing and constructing to the target, optimizing operations, because a ZNE building isn't only built to ZNE, it's operated to ZNE, and then measuring and verifying your success. our presenters will dive a little deeper into their approaches for cost-effective design, but as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to highlight a few key strategies we've seen in our research that has led to ZNE schools coming in with little to no additional incremental costs. So this really ties back to the common themes I mentioned in the previous slide, but focusing on this integrated design process throughout design so these ZNE decisions can be made early. Assigning a team member to review all available rebates, incentives, and local financing options. Using a life cycle cost analysis to account for cost savings over the life of the building. This can really help later when, let's say, a certain ZNE system package might potentially be on the chopping block. These systems can be a higher upfront cost maybe, but of course, they also may not be more than the business as usual system and can be shown to save money in the long run. So that life cycle cost analysis is really important. Setting measurable energy targets to guide design and operations, integrating those energy targets into contract language to ensure the correct and cost-effective construction and operation, involving maintenance staff, commissioning agents, controls integrators throughout the design, construction, and then after occupancy, and then soliciting early feedback from building occupants and team members so you can integrate their needs early in the design process. I'm going to quickly explain what I keep mentioning Proposition 39 and Prop 39. So I'm going to quickly explain to those listening in who might not be familiar with the program, as you'll hear it mentioned throughout the rest of the webinar as well. And to be clear, there's Proposition 39, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which provides roughly $550 million annually to eligible schools to improve energy efficiency and expand renewable energy generation. And then there's the ZNE School Retrofit Pilot Program that is administered by the California Investor-Owned Utilities. So the ZNE School Retrofit Pilot Program provides school districts additional financial resources to retrofit some of these existing K-12 and community college buildings to really demonstrate the technical feasibility of ZNE retrofits. And in addition to on-the-ground pilots, the program also supports the development of case studies, trainings, webinars, and workshops, as well as the ZNE School Leadership Awards and Recognition Program, which all work together to disseminate the lessons learned of the ZNE retrofit process. Currently, about 12 projects are in the program and are looking to be completed at the end of this year or early next year. And I'd like to thank PG&E for giving us these slides. So before I pass this off to the presenters, you're almost done with me. I just wanted to highlight some of the quick resources available to school districts looking to pursue ZNE. So I'll go through these very quickly, but of course these slides will be available after for reference. We have Prop 39 case studies, guides and toolkits for getting to zero, and these are all available on our Getting to Zero resource hub along with some additional resources. So that's it from me. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or you need any assistance on your path to zero energy. And I'd like to introduce, finally, Nick Kessner, the Director of Sustainability for San Francisco Unified School District, and Christos Chrysiliou, the Director of Architectural and Engineering Services for the Los Angeles Unified School District, who will be our presenters today. So Nick, I'm going to pass the presenter off to you, and then feel free to get going. All right, you have presenter.
Thank you, Riley. I'm glad I remembered to unmute. This is part of a presentation I did at the conference in Pasadena about our process of implementing our district-wide ZNE plan. And I want to focus this presentation mainly on costs, obviously, but I have a lot of other information to share, which we can cover at a different time. San Francisco Unified is the 7th largest school district in California, which makes us not that big. But we are a dense urban environment with lots of diverse students. We have about 55,000 of them. Most of them are low income. Our city supports the school district with bonds very reliably, although I should note that about a quarter of San Francisco students go to private schools, which is, I think, maybe even the highest of any city in the country. So we have a lot of challenges. But one other challenge we decided to tackle, let me back up, is the governor's pledge to reduce our carbon emissions. We are a big fan of his bold leadership on climate change, and we wanted to do our part. So what we did is we looked at California's ZNE building goals, and we recognized that all new residential construction and all new commercial construction in California will be zero net energy by 2020 and 2030, respectively. So we have 11 or 12 years for all new construction to hit ZNE targets. Well, as it turns out, see if I can get this thing to advance. It seems to be stuck. Riley, can you see if you can advance? There we go. As it turns out, getting to ZNE, oh, I guess I went too far. Sorry about that. It's responding very slowly. Getting to ZNE construction by 2030 is actually not a big deal. This is a chart that shows you how much more energy efficient we've become in California over time, thanks to code. So we're right here right now, and the 2020 code will drop us a little bit more. And then in another 1, 2, 3 code cycles, all new construction will have to be ZNE. And those improvements of the next 3 code cycles are no more dramatic than they have been in the past. You can actually see the one in 2017 was quite a big drop in energy usage. So we felt like for new construction, getting to ZNE was not a big deal. And we're seeing that in the market too. There's a lot of schools being built, a lot of new schools being built that are ZNE ready or that have solar on the roof and are actually generating as much power as they need over the course of the year. This one happens to be New York. But the thing is that our schools are not new schools. Most of our portfolio looks like this. These are old buildings that have been around for up to 100 or more years. And so our big question, of course, was, what does the governor have to say about our buildings? Well, it turns out that California would like 50% of existing commercial buildings to be retrofit to ZNE by 2030. Let me repeat that. A half of all existing buildings should be ZNE by 2030. When we saw that requirement, we had a bit of a different response. Boy, this really takes the fun out of my slides when it takes so long for the transitions.
Sorry about that, Nick.
Oh,
just
there it goes.
keep
I'm
trying.
just gonna clearly, getting half of our buildings to use no net energy by 2030 was one of those moments that made you think, is this even realistic? So the first thing we needed to do was to figure out if that's even possible to do with an old building with the old buildings that we have in San Francisco. Come on. Riley, do you want to see if you can do it quicker from your end?
Yeah, why don't you just tell me next slide and we'll give it a shot.
Do it now. Thankfully, right about this time, the Division of the State Architect put together a presentation where he invited 7 architecture firms to present 7 case studies with different types of existing buildings in California schools in various climate zones. And the upshot of the presentation was that all the architects felt like with particular measures, it was possible to get these existing buildings to a ZNE ready status with normal conventional technologies. And this one in particular, the school in Santa Barbara, looks very similar to the high schools you might find in San Francisco. And the fact that this school was able to achieve ZNE ready, at least in conceptual form, was a big motivator for us. Next slide. So we decided to look at the impact that our bonds have had on energy usage. And you'll see that these are about 15 or so schools that we modernized in the 2011 bond. And the ones at the top all reduced their energy usage from pre-modernization, which is the light purple bars, to post-modernization. What's more, some of these schools are operating, the ones here at the top, are operating at 20 kBTUs per square foot or less, which is a very solid energy efficiency rating. We also noticed, however, that that was not a consistent pattern. The schools at the bottom here use more energy after modernization than before modernization. In some cases, quite dramatically so, as you can see at the bottom. But overall, I would say that the savings were greater than the increases. So there is some hope that modernization can lead to major reductions in energy usage. Next slide. But we realized to get there, we would need a framework. We couldn't just rely on luck getting us to ZNE. Next slide. So we brought together our brightest minds and sat down to come up with a game plan for how SFUSD would meet this 2030 requirement. Next slide. We also looked to see what other school districts are doing. In this case, Boulder Valley School District has had a sustainability management system since 2009, and they've also got ZNE goals of their own. So they helped motivate our desire to come up with something similar for our district. Next slide. We did a lot of site visits. There aren't that many ZNE buildings yet, but we did find one here at Campbell Unified School District. Blackford Elementary School has a brand new building. I think it's an auditorium or a lunch cafeteria that was designed to use no net energy over the course of the year. They also modernized the rest of the campus and used a lot of design elements that that we have now adopted into our own standards. Next slide. Next slide. Yep, perfect. We also had to figure out what our energy target should be. And so we used this handy Department of Energy chart that identifies the site energy guidelines that are cost effective in different climate zones. So in San Francisco, you'll notice we're in climate zone. This is the, I guess, the national, not the state climate zones, 3C. And in that climate zone, a primary school can be cost effectively built at an efficiency level of 21, an EUI of 21.6, and a secondary, middle, or high school at EUI of 19. As you go to more difficult climate zones, it becomes less cost effective to go quite as far on the efficiency front because solar panels have gotten so cheap that it's just easier to add a few more solar panels. So places like Miami, Florida, the top of the chart, which has obviously a bigger cooling load, for them, it doesn't make sense to be quite as efficient as San Francisco buildings because they'll just add some more solar on the roof. So we split the difference between these two numbers and decided that our EUI targets for all buildings, all new construction, will be 20 kBTUs per square foot per year. Next slide. One major thing we had to discuss is what technologies were going to get us there. Next slide. This is what our Buildings and Grounds department thought I had in mind. But the reality on the ground is that we've got boilers like this where we burn naughty children and where we heat our buildings. Next slide. But the problem with a natural gas boiler is that, and this is a problem that's been identified in the last few years, there's a lot of leaks, both at the point of extraction of natural gas in Wyoming or wherever it happens, but also in the distribution pipeline. So for us, we don't consider natural gas a clean fuel, and we wanted to see if we could bypass natural gas and move right to renewable energy, essentially. Next slide. The other reason we wanted to do that is that we modeled some of our existing schools that were about to undergo modernization to see which measures would be the most effective at getting us to an EUI below 20, which is that pink line. And you'll notice that switching to LEDs makes a big impact. Adding occupancy sensors makes a minor impact once you've got efficient LEDs. Scheduling the boiler helps. Electric hot water heating helps a little bit. And that is heat pump water heating, not regular electric resistance heating. Insulation in our climate makes very little difference, although I'm sure that's very different in Minnesota. But the most important thing we could do was to electrify our buildings. Adding a central heat pump or even zone heat pumps reduces that EUI below the magic 20 number for the San Francisco climate zone. So next slide. The way a heat pump works, and the reason it's so efficient, is that instead of generating the heat inside your building, it takes the heat that's outside your school, represented by the yellow balls, it concentrates that heat and releases it inside the building. And because that concentration process is much more efficient than actually creating the heat in the first place, heat pumps can be much more effective. The other way to think about them is that they're an air conditioner working in reverse. Instead of cooling a space, they will actually heat a space. In fact, heat pumps can air condition in the summer and they can cool in the winter. Next slide. The problem with heat pumps is that if we have a bunch of employees in our buildings and grounds shop that are used to servicing boilers, we can't just switch to heat pumps all at once because none of those employees will be able to service them. So in agreement with buildings and grounds, we decided that our plan must include an emphasis on lighting and envelope initially, and to focus the heating and renewables upgrades further down the line as much as possible to give a chance for existing employees to retire and to gradually be replaced by other employees that are more familiar with heat pumps and VRF systems. Next slide. So we started to look at what funding options were available to cover the costs of this ZNE upgrade. Next slide. And there are many. However, from just a project implementation standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to piggyback on an existing modernization process. So like most school districts, every decade, every 12, 15 years, we hit a school and we make some improvements. And as much as possible, we want those improvements to be aligned with our ZNE efforts. We don't want to have to do projects all over the school district that disrupt the occupants just so we can replace a boiler or just so we can add some new lighting. Next slide. The other benefit of doing that, tap once, is that if we go into a school and all we do is replace the gas boiler with an electric heat pump, we have a lot of components to install, and it is a very disruptive process. And we basically chalk up the entire cost to our ZNE efforts, which means it's a very expensive way of doing ZNE. Tap twice. If, on the other hand, we're going to have to replace the boiler anyway because it's broken and we're going in there as part of a modernization project, then the only cost associated with ZNE is the delta between the heat pump system we're putting in now and the boiler we would have put in before. So the boiler we would have put in if we didn't have our ZNE goals. So if I take that delta, next tap, then I can start to make ZNE look a lot more cost effective. Next slide. That still doesn't solve another problem, which is, tap once, that we have split incentives. This is Wazi Chaudhry, our Director of Design for the bond program. He's concerned about the budget for the bond as a whole, and he wants to make sure that we get to as many schools as possible while doing a decent job. Next tap. On the other side is Rita Kanu, who is responsible for, Rita Madhavan, who is responsible for our, she's our fiscal officer at the school district. Her interest is not in the cost of construction, but in the operational cost further down the line. So while Wazi is interested in keeping our upfront costs low, Rita is interested in keeping our down the line costs low. And these are obviously in direct opposition. The nice thing about this, however, is that when I'm making design decisions with the design team or making recommendations, I can often refer to Rita's interests in recommending sustainability features, because people around the table can get behind the fact that we are doing this to improve the school district's the learning environment, but also its financial footprint. So by focusing on those operational costs, we can justify marginal additional costs up front because they will end up providing a better building. Next slide. So in the end, what we decided to do is we're actually mandating that all new schools be ZNE ready, effective immediately, because the technology is there and there's plenty of examples. There's no reason to wait for 2030. We are modernizing our buildings and getting them up to snuff as we replace systems. So if we're replacing a roof, we'll make it ZNE ready. But if we're not replacing the roof, we'll get to it next time. And we're not worrying about renewables in San Francisco, although most of that is due to the fact that we already have Hetch-Hetchy power supplied by our municipal utility, and our utility costs are therefore extremely low. And so we don't have the financial case for adding solar the way that many of your school districts do, because you pay power to PG&E or to Southern California Edison, et cetera. Next slide. We enshrine all of that in the carbon reduction plan seen on the left, and we hand that out to design teams so that they know what we have in mind and what design guidelines we want them to follow. Next slide. So as you're probably imagining, that's all we had to do, and now all of our schools are on their way to ZNE. The reality, of course, looks a little different. Next slide. As we know in San Francisco, not all roads are super straight. Next slide. And while we thought that we would start with lighting and envelope measures, next slide, it turned out that many of our schools actually had boilers that were ready to be replaced. So we have been putting in a ton of heat pump systems, and this, of course, has caused some concern in our buildings and grounds department because they're not used to operating these. And that has meant that we've had to do a lot of additional training, and we've had to get them involved in conversations with manufacturers so they understand what they're getting into. Next slide. So we've put in a bunch of new VRF systems like these in our schools, or we're in the process of doing so. Next slide. But one of the lessons that we've learned is that you can't be 100% pure about these things. In some cases, you're going to lose a few, and that doesn't necessarily detract from the greater effort. It just shows that you can be pragmatic. So in one example, Clarinet Elementary School, we had to replace a boiler in a building that we were not otherwise touching. So we had three options. We could put in a new heat pump system, which would have been our default in compliance with our ZNE guidelines. We could have replaced the gas heating. I'm sorry, that's supposed to be, we could replace the gas heating with a new gas heating system, which we didn't want to do because that's a lot of investment in infrastructure we don't like. Or we could come up with a compromise, which is that we replaced the boilers and we replaced a few unit ventilators, but we that the pipes would last us until we had some future funding to modernize that building with an electric heat pump system. The basic bottom line is that you always need to realize if you have goals like ours to get to ZNE by 2040, there's a lot of time between now and then to hit some of these exceptions. As long as you're making general progress towards your goal, you can be in good shape. Next slide. Oh, forgot I did that. Okay, next slide. Another thing that we just discovered, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because we're towards the end of my time, but there's three kinds of heat pumps. There are heat pumps, which are kind of the rooftop units that you see right there. Then there are VRF systems, which are usually Japanese or Korean products, although I think Carrier buys some of those as well, which you see at the bottom where you have an outdoor unit and you have refrigerant lines going to your individual spaces. And then there are VRF systems like the ones on the bottom with heat recovery. And those are especially fancy because, as you can tell from the diagram, some spaces can be heated while other spaces can be cooled, all at the same time. And what makes them particularly efficient is that they can take the heat from rooms that need to be cooled and dump it into rooms that need to be heated. So they're not even going to grab heat from the outside, which in the winter, of course, is a good thing. The problem is they're more expensive. So what we've realized is that when you have a situation where all your zones are kind of experiencing the same climate, there's no reason to pay for the extra VRF with heat recovery because the various zones are probably going to be calling for air conditioning at the same time and heat at the same time. In sites where we do have climatic conditions that differ from one side of the building to the other, that might be an appropriate time to use VRF. So by choosing wisely, you really reduce the upfront cost of going with the heat pump system. Next slide. We also learned to put our electric domestic hot water efforts on hold for cooking kitchens. And the reason for that is that the recovery rate of electric resistance heaters and especially heat pump heaters is much slower than for gas. So there was some concern that we wouldn't pass our DPH inspections, our public health inspections. So what we're doing now is we're only switching to electric water heating when we're doing a fuel switch at a site anyway, when we are going with electric heating, space heating anyway. But if we're going into a school and we need to replace a water heater, but the school is going to be on gas for the foreseeable future, we will go ahead and put in a gas water heater, and we're going to actively work to identify electric options that have a better recovery rate. And there are a few that are on the market that are specifically made for commercial products, but we're not familiar with them yet, so we haven't made that switch. Next. We found out that switching the cooking kitchens is relatively easy, and that's because if you are cooking healthy food, which we are, you tend not to want to fry or grill food too much. And those are the two areas where people tend to like natural gas. Another thing we discovered is that combination or combi ovens and induction stoves are actually really high performing devices that a lot of our kitchen staff and managers love. So the fact that we were essentially encouraging them to move in that direction was something they didn't have a problem with. And finally, we actually got a lower upfront cost for when we specified an all-electric kitchen versus a non-electric kitchen. But having said all those wonderful things, it is still important that your chefs are trained on this. So there are a lot of resources. I think in Northern and Southern California, there are food service technology centers provided by the utilities that help schools and anybody make that transition to electric cooking. Next step. The dreaded electric upgrade has come back to bite us a couple of times. And the problem here is that if we are a natural gas heating school and we don't have air conditioning, which is probably not true for most of you, but in our case it was, in some cases we have to upgrade our electrical service in order to put in all these heat pumps because that demand used to be met by natural gas. If we're lucky, it's just a few panels that need to be upgraded. If we're not lucky, it might be switchgear, transformers, or God forbid, the service. Now, clearly, that is a huge upfront cost. The way we've dealt with that is that we have $5 million set aside in our $750 million bond that is for sustainability upgrades. And basically what that covers is the delta between the sustainable ZNE project that we are planning versus what we would have done if it weren't for our sustainability office. And so in cases where we do need to do an upgrade, we have that little pot of money that people have just agreed is used for this purpose. Next step. Connie, saw your note, I'm almost done. Luckily for most of you, you have air conditioning already, which means your buildings are already sized for a big electric load, and you probably shouldn't have a problem switching out your electric AC with electric heat pumps. Next step. And then a couple last items. We were going to put solar tubes everywhere, and we realized that they don't provide a lot of daylighting value if they're just transitional spaces like corridors or bathrooms. So we've limited those to interior offices, so we have more room for PV on the roof. Next step, next slide. Similarly, we were going to put stanchions on the roof whenever we re-roof, but with ballasted systems now becoming more popular and approved by DSA, we decided to save that cost. And all we do to get our schools ready for solar is to add some conduits from the utility room to the roof and hose bibs so those panels can be washed off afterward. Next step. And finally, if you tap one more time, or maybe 3 more times, I'm not going to do the rest of the presentation, but I just want to mention with this slide up that you need to be aware of your utility costs. So in our case, you can see that water rates and electric rates are going up pretty dramatically, but they're starting at an extremely low level. So for us, it makes sense to use electric heating. If you have high electric rates, you might think that would exclude you from using electric heating, but a lot of you are also paying demand charges, which makes batteries really interesting. And you might be paying time of use rates, so solar can really help out. So if your heat pumps are powered by the solar on your roof already, then you don't really need to care about the electric rate. So depending on your situation, switching to electricity can actually be a really positive thing and a real financial benefit. And though I have some slides on this, you can check those out when you download the presentation in the future. So I will wrap it up there and hand it over to Christos.
Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate it. So this is Christos Christili with the LA Unified School District. I'm going to go ahead and start my portion of the presentation. Nick, your presentation was very informative. Really appreciate it. We share a lot of similar concepts and ideas and strategies, and I'm going to try and do a little bit more dive into cost analysis if I can with the time that we have. I know that between the two school districts we probably need 2 hours, but we're going to try and do things within an hour. So let's try and do that. So let me try and move this slide for a second. Okay. So our agenda for this meeting today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the LA Unified School District, our commitment. We're going to focus on policies and programs, and then we're going to look at some sample projects that we did cost analysis based on the different programs that we have. Then we're going to do a call to action. So a few things about the LA Unified School District, the second largest school district in the nation. We have over 60,000 employees. We cover about 210 square miles. In terms of our building area, we have about 70 million square feet of building area in 6,500 acres of land. So over 13,000 buildings and over 800 campuses. So our Sustainability Initiatives Unit was formed in 2009. Let's go back. Sorry. Our Sustainability Initiatives Unit was formed in 2009, and we have 6 focus areas. I'm going to be focusing and spending a little bit more time on some specific areas that are related to zero net energy, but these are the areas. Mostly, I'll be focusing on energy conservation. I'll be discussing emerging technologies, high performance schools, and awareness and outreach. So our commitment is to be the most sustainable school district in the nation by developing different types of programs, and we established some goals. And these goals that we're sharing now, they keep evolving based on new findings that we have and new resolutions that come forward, specifically with the governor's new resolution of reaching ZNE by 2030 for our buildings. So some of the goals that we set up in place with the Department of Energy is 20% energy intensity reduction by 2024, the same with water consumption, and then certainly continuing supporting our high performance design and providing education and awareness programs for our students, and also looking at new technologies as well as campus greening throughout. Some of the policies and programs that came to place, and it's interesting to find out how we evolved through time. So if I go back in time, and I mentioned about the resolution that was passed by the board in 2007, and that's how the Sustainability Initiatives Unit was formed out of that. And for us, looking on becoming the most sustainable school district in the nation, we have focus areas that we've established. And certainly we are one of the largest users in terms of water energy in the state of California. And that's why we have to focus on specific programs to be able to minimize that impact. So how do we do that? And we're going to touch a little bit on how we engage different stakeholders to help us through that process, and what else we have to do within our design practices. And certainly how we can get to ZNE. There's a lot of things that we've putting in place. Some of them are in place right now, and this presentation is going to focus on some of the programs that we have, that we're applying some strategies, and we're learning out of the strategies, as well as from other school districts as well, and our utility agencies, of how we can become more efficient throughout this process. So these are some of the resolutions that I mentioned before, and while we have some of these resolutions, it's what happened in terms of LA Unified and how we helped develop our district in terms of our sustainability programs. One of the interesting things I wanted to mention, regardless of us establishing the Sustainability Initiatives Unit, the school district always pay attention to high-performance schools. Actually, back in October 2003, we adopted the CHIPS criteria, and we continue to apply these different types of performance criteria on our buildings, and that's how we're able to learn a lot of things that we are applying today, and we'll continue to do that. So, and then we came up with some other bulletins that we're able to share within our facilities to help us to maximize energy and water efficiency throughout. And then now we're in the progress of developing ZNE-ready design features into our new buildings, modernizations, and on all of our facility projects with a ZNE-ready target of 19.1 EOI. And I know Nick touched on that, and Riley, you touched on that as well, so I'm not going to spend a lot, but that's pretty much where we want to be in terms of our climate zone that we are. That's following ASHRAE standards. So, so we're looking at different goals that we're applying in terms of our guidelines, and we'll continue with those goals, sharing within establishing guidelines for our new designs, as well as challenging our professional architects to come up with new strategies to help us achieve more efficient buildings. And certainly you can see pretty much the same different types of standards that we kind of share throughout in terms of adding PV and other systems or technologies to help us do that. But something that we've been doing throughout the process, specifically on our new construction program process, as it evolved back in the early 2000s, and we will complete this program about a few years ago, it was to be able to develop processes and best practices to engage our building users, engage division of instruction, engage different entities to help support some of the processes that we have today, and do more analysis of how we can achieve some of these different kind of performances that we're just referring to. So these are the programs that we have focused on our 6 focus areas, and I have to say that very, very pleased with our team that we have, because each team is focused on specific areas and specific programs. So we're going to touch on some specific programs so you can understand how we utilize the lessons of the past and the active projects that we have today to at least help us out achieve more efficient buildings. So you can see a lot of different programs here throughout, but because of our time, I'll keep moving to more specific programs so we can get to the analysis that you're all interested to hear about. So in terms of energy conservation, our Prop 39 projects, it's one of the biggest programs that we have within sustainability now. We are planning on at least touch about 112 of our school district sites. We have about $141 million to spend on these sites, and pretty much this process, it's in the planning, design, and construction. We have completed some of the projects out of Prop 39, and we have different measures that we have applied for. And some of these measures you're seeing here, specifically lighting, electrical controls, and mechanical systems, I'm going to touch to share with you at least what we're seeing in terms of efficiency and lessons learned out of those buildings, and how we're utilizing those lessons to achieve more as we move through the process. We certainly have other programs as we partnering up with our local utility agencies The Department of Water and Power, we have a program that is it's helping us develop efficiency throughout. And then we have some other programs that were in the works, while some other programs were completed earlier, such as our PV solar initiative program that was completed about a few years ago and developed about 21 megawatt within the school district. Water stewardship, a lot of programs here, perhaps not of interest for this event, but for us, a big challenge, and we're doing well in terms of trying to reduce water consumption throughout the district and trying to achieve our 20% reduction by 2024. High performance schools, I mentioned earlier about how important this is for us because this was a kind of an eye-opener in terms of what we can do with facilities. It helped us learn our buildings better by looking at specific criteria and applying criteria to the different elements of the buildings. And with that, we're able to develop and we'll continue to develop healthy and comfortable learning environmental designs throughout the district. We are one of the highest high-performance schools district in the nation. We have over 127 chips verified to date. We're also applying LEED, and we're comparing criteria to learn from both criteria as our goal is to develop healthy and safe school buildings. So we'll continue that effort, and again, as we're evolving, we're adding zero net energy ready to our menu of options, and we're trying to see how we're going to be able to get there. Emerging technologies is crucial for us, so we're focusing on a lot of the different technologies, and some of the technologies that we're testing right now, we're learning in terms of which one will be the most applicable based on the different types and sizes of buildings that we have. And there's several technologies that were already applied for, or we're able to take some of the different technologies and put them on even on our standards. Some of them are still going through testing with ultimate goals that we're trying to be able to manage systems remotely and being able to control different types of systems throughout the entire district through a command control center, and being able to create more, at least be more responsive to issues on the school side, to have an oversight, but also to create more resiliency on our schools. So ecology, we're big on that because as we're improving our school districts inside, we look at the outside of our buildings as well, and we're trying to develop schoolyards that our students can learn from and develop different skills. So this is a great program that we're very proud of, that we're continuing throughout the entire district. And then the awareness and outreach, perhaps one of my favorites, because we're learning that there's a lot of programs that by engaging our students and empowering our students through different programs, we're creating a whole new culture of supporters that will help support us throughout to achieve our goals and help improve our environment. So let's talk about some sample projects and strategies so you can at least see what are we doing. And for us, when we look at the utility cost increases within the school district, we're seeing that certainly our electricity use and our water it keeps increasing at a high rate, and we've been having 5% increases for the past 3 years, and it's going to continue to 2020. So you can see our current electricity bill is over 100 million, and water over 20. So for us, any kind of reductions, it's a lot of more money we'll be able to put back into the classroom to help offset our general fund. So that's a challenge. So here we are to the ZNE race, and you probably know the story about the hare and the tortoise, so I'm not going to get into the details, but more of the moral of this year, of this race, it's a little unique because while we are different school districts and we have perhaps different challenges, at the end of the day, we're trying to achieve the same goal. And there's a lot of uniqueness in terms of the different buildings that we have, and Nick mentioned about the different types of buildings that San Francisco has here in LA as well. Our buildings, they're over average building. It's probably 50 years old, and we have a lot of older buildings. And certainly we have a new construction program that we just completed. We have a lot of new modernizations that we're going through right now, and we have a lot of different programs that we're processing. We call it a critical repair program, that we're looking at our schools and we're trying to fix systems that have their useful life. So we do have a facilities condition assessment and an index that we look at to make sure that we go through that process. So for this exercise, looking at Prop 39 program and looking at some of the things that we learned through time, we took two different projects that we wanted to showcase here and learn from it. So we took the first project is Helen Bernstein, and this project, it's very unique. It's a new construction project that completed in the early 2000s, and we noticed as we started looking at this project that we had a AUI of actually even higher than 36, but the baseline in 2014 was 36. And we're applying a lot of different strategies on this one here as well to reduce the UI, and I'm going to share what those are. So on any of these buildings, our approach is always awareness and conservation, and we have a lot of programming for that. Certainly energy efficiency by applying different strategies, and then we add renewable energy so we can reach zero net energy. So one of the things that we did, and we continue to do through our buildings, is to benchmark each facility. This gives us a better understanding of our facilities. We identify special items that we know that it's important for us to understand the facility itself, and then looked at the different systems, and we look at some of the different energy facts so we can understand what they do and how we can be able to minimize our EUI on these buildings. So that's something for us that we're doing on every single building to better understand what they are and what we're trying to achieve. So our Prop 39 efficiency program was focused on over 112 buildings, and as we do the investment grade audits, our team did an excellent job working with the energy service companies to go out and look at a lot of these strategies, and look at strategies from interior lighting retrofits. And you can see some of the information I share with you in red. This is some of the existing features that we had and what were they replaced with. So I'm not going to go through reading each one of them. You can do that, but you can see is the related cost, the annual expected savings, and what are we trying to achieve in terms of our EUI reduction. So each strategy and the way that we approach Prop 39, we looked at the sites that they have the highest electricity use. So we try to find the features that's going to lower our building consumption, our energy consumption throughout. So obviously we looked at interior lighting, exterior lighting. We looked at our mechanical systems. We looked at the EMS systems that we have on each specific school site. We looked at our central plants. So we tried to find ways of how we can reduce that. And on this specific school, we even had a swimming pool. And so we kind of looked at the addition of variable frequency drives to our existing speed pumps that we have. We did the same thing on our mechanical systems as well. And as well, we look at the existing transformers, and as they were coming to their useful life as well, we replace some of those with more efficient transformers. So each one of those has its specific measures. Then we took the baseline EUI, and we look at the analysis here in terms of the different components that I just shared with you right now. We're able to do a reduction from 36 to 28.8 in terms of the EUI for this specific building. And then once we did that, we realized that our energy usage is still high, so we went to look at additional measures. So we did an analysis on additional measures. We looked at the building envelope, and we did an analysis to see what's the investment on that, looking at different types, including glazing in terms of applying window film, or even our building surfaces, metallic paint, to our roof systems to be able to add insulation. And that gives you a breakdown in terms of the cost. The same with the HVAC mechanical upgrades. And the way that we looked at this specifically on the building systems and our approach is to work with the Facilities Condition Index. That is, we have a team through our maintenance and operations that keeps updating the lifespan of a lot of this equipment. And as we come to their service life, then our strategy is to at least look at them and see if we can replace them with more efficient. Now, what that means is that a lot of these systems here that you're seeing it just represents the actual cost of going to a higher SEER rating or a higher rating. It doesn't look at the actual cost of the investment or replacing of a building component. So we're applying a lot of different strategies, and then we're adding solar. We're limited to 1 megawatt in terms of solar, and you can see the solar analysis that we've done on our buildings, on this specific building here, and then we see what the reduction is that in terms of adding rooftop and carport solar systems. Now, when we look at all the measures together, and we look at the actual additional plant energy efficiency measures, and then we're adding a solar panel, we're seeing an investment of about $6.1 million, and what the energy cost savings will be, including the KWH, and how we can be able to bring ourselves now from 18.76 down to 10.26 EY, which is more like closer to ZNE. Now, because of time, I'm going to jump to the next study. We've done the same study for Santee, and we looked at the different type of systems here. We benchmarked first to be able to understand what the facility was. We add our Prop 39 different measures here as well. Within the cost analysis and breakdown, we look at the EY reduction, including what is our return on investment on some of these facilities. And you can see a lot of different strategies here that we've applied as well. You can be able to read through them, and I can expand on any of them if you have any questions. But pretty much the same measures of trying to upgrade EMS systems, try to create more efficiency in terms of replacing constant volume with variable frequency drives. This is things that we are able to achieve a lower EY reduction. And then again, the same analysis here of how we can take a baseline EY and reduce it down to, in this case, a targeted to 30, and then adding new strategies out of our new technologies that we're looking at of how we can lower and applying them as we modernize or as we repair some of these components. And then looking at solar as well. The only thing I wanted to note here on solar, we added a higher cost. We can, I know this is going to get more efficient through time. We'll be able to pay a lot less, but we had about $6 per square foot per watt, sorry. So eventually this probably dropped down to $4 to $3. But again, it depends on the type of systems that we're installing, including racking systems or if it's a carport or whatever it is. Here you can see the actual measures and a summary of what the investment is and how we can be able to lower down to 8.8. So actually, once we apply these measures, we have over 70% EY reduction throughout. So call to action, my message here more than anything else is that we need to understand our facilities. They're very unique. We need to understand based on location, based on type, what we're trying to achieve, and how we can create that impact throughout. This is not a one-sided, race in terms of how we're going to achieve ZNE energy. So it takes a little bit of balancing. So we need to kind of look at all the different strategies and apply them through a strategy that is continuous evolving based on needs of the district, based on current bonds that we have available, and current goals that were set as a team. So with this, I want to thank NBI, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Riley, as we're all trying to achieve safe, healthy, and sustainable learning school environments to support our students. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Christos. Man, we fit 120 slides into 60 minutes, so good work, team. We are out of time, but for those of you that did send in your questions, we will take them and have our presenters answer them, and then we'll post them along with this recording up on the New Buildings Institute website. And everyone who registered will also receive an email follow-up with all of the slides, the questions, and then also a survey. So if you don't mind filling that out, we would appreciate it. I think that's it for me. Have a great rest of your week.